Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our HashiCorp Hangout hosted by Ehron Gwinn of our Solutions Engineering team. We recently announced Consul Connect, which completes Consul as our new service mesh. Ehron is going to show the new features of Consul Connect in a live demo. After the demo, we will take live questions from the audience. I also want to note that the Hangout is recorded and the recording will be made available after post-processing, usually within about a day or two. I'll email it out to all of you. And I also want to note the demo will be about 15 minutes, and then we will allow up to 30 minutes afterward for questions. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Ehron, take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ehron Gwinn. Is my camera not working, Amanda?
Not.
I just see black. All right. Well, I apologize. It was working a moment ago. So I guess we'll just work with that. As I mentioned, my name is Ehron Gwinn. I am a solutions engineer from the Southeast. So I lived in Atlanta. All right. Yeah, I don't know what is going on with this GoToMeeting software here. Let's see. All right. How about now?
Yes, there we go.
All right. Technology.
Of live webinars, everyone.
Yes, sorry about that. And I actually normally run Linux, and I had to boot into Windows because this particular sharing software doesn't support Linux. So this is not my normal computer. So anyway, sorry for any problems, people. But again, so we'll just keep chugging along here. So a few weeks ago, we released a new feature for Consul called Consul Connect. So for those of you who are already familiar with Consul, we're going to do just a little bit of review. So Consul provides a number of features to help with sort of more modern distributed apps or legacy apps that are just moving into more of an ephemeral infrastructure like a cloud service provider or something similar. So Consul has a set of servers that runs, and then each endpoint that's going to use Consul has an agent installed. So in this instance, I'm just connected to an endpoint. In this case, this particular machine is running the web client portion of an application that we're going to look at in just a moment. And it has a Consul agent running locally. So we can do things like, so one of the features that Consul provides is a distributed KV store. So this lets you do things like, it can work in conjunction with traditional config management solutions like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Salt, for config items that can't wait for the convergence time of half an hour or an hour of whatever the time the traditional tools have. So we can do things like Consul KV get app config dev or something like that, and we could just pull key value pairs from Consul itself. And obviously you can. So just an example, we could use this to assign different groups of properties depending upon where a particular application is running. You could use this to enable feature flags or something like that if you're trying to test a new feature or a bit of functionality on an existing app. There's a lot of ways that you can use this. You can actually, so there's a sort of extension of the KV store that lets you manage sessions. So, for instance, if you have a set of traditional databases, relational databases, and you need to make sure that only one is ever presented, but you want to make sure that you have read replicas available to be promoted, you can use the session functionality within Consul to do things like, like that. So additionally, Consul provides a service discovery functionality. So what this lets us do is we can define services, which we can just look at an example service. So for instance, this web client, we can basically just define a service, give it a name, tell it what port it's running on, things like that, assign some tags. And from there, Consul will take care of, let's see, find the window I was in. I don't guess it matters. Consul will take care of presenting that and making it available for others to consume. So for instance, if I was just looking at the web client service, if I wanted to find an instance within networking reach that is running that particular service, I can actually query that via DNS. So I'm going to query my local Consul agent here, and I'm going to give it the name of the service that I'm interested in.
Hey, Ehron, sorry to interrupt. Can you enlarge that font a bit for people?
I honestly don't know if I can. Let me try. Let me see here. Hey, I can. All right. Thanks, Amanda. Okay, so we just did a basic DNS query. So this is the way that Consul integrates with existing applications. It just uses DNS. So you don't have to rewrite apps. You can just use Consul right out of the box because pretty much everything on Earth already speaks DNS. So what's neat is there I just looked for a service. What we can do now that we've added these Connect-based services is just also we can find services that are presented and available to connect. So let me search for a different service. Let's look for Mongo. And here we can find a particular, so this is the database service I'm running. And if you have multiple services, that's fine. We can receive multiple records. We can also ensure that the records that are returned are healthy, because Consul also allows you to register health checks, and it will only ever return instances that are healthy. So that's sort of a very quick and dirty primer on Consul. So now let's move on to the new functionality, which is Consul Connect. So this is the user interface here, and I'm just looking at all of the services that I have registered. And you can see here the name of a service and then a proxy. So this is what makes Connect really special. Let's say you're already using Consul. If you wanted to test Connect in your environment, assuming you're running on the latest version or a version that supports Connect, all you have to do is just update the config file to add a section that enables Connect. And from there, Consul will actually start this embedded proxy locally for you. So you don't have to integrate this into an existing service mesh or proxy platform or anything like that. Just right out of the box, you just enable Connect on the servers, enable Connect on the clients, and it'll start a proxy. And from there, you can actually start encrypting communications between endpoints. So how does the security in Connect work? Connect is used to secure communications between services. So it does this using mutual TLS. So in this example, if I'm the web client and I want to talk to the listing API, then as long as that is allowed by Connect, then both ends have certificates that are actually managed by Consul, and they can do mutual authentication to verify both the identity and then authorization before the connection is allowed to go through. And once the connection is established, it's all encrypted using TLS. So you basically get this very easy to use sort of transparent security solution that works on any network. It doesn't matter where this is being deployed. You don't have to have any kind of a sophisticated network overlay or anything like that. It's just very simple and easy to use. And as you'll see, it's actually sort of a much more natural way to think about security, because instead of managing that 7,000 line spreadsheet that I'm sure you all have that has all the firewall rules that exist, instead of that, we can actually just think about service-to-service communications using this concept of intentions. So intentions are actually how we specify the rules that I guess authorize one service to communicate with another. So in this case, we can see here just a number of intentions, really simple. Here we have some services that we saw under the services tab, listing, and I'll show you this app in just a second. In fact, this is probably a good time to show you. All right, so can I make this bigger? There we go. So this is just a quick and dirty image that outlines this application. We have a web client that is communicating with a set of APIs, and each sort of leg of communication is secured using Connect. So the web client is running Consul and it has a proxy, and that encrypts communication to the listing or the product API. And then in turn, the listing or the product API is running Consul, and they each have their own proxy that is going to encrypt communication to the database. So the way this works is sort of, just like if you've ever set up a web app and you used Nginx or something like that as the front-end web proxy, you basically just configure your apps to listen on localhost. And then you configure the local proxy to communicate with the pre-configured port that's running on localhost. So for instance, this Node.js app is running on port 8000. So my Consul proxy will forward traffic that it receives to the application. So from a deployment standpoint, your application doesn't really know that Connect is there. It just knows that it's listening locally, and you don't have to modify it in any way. So if we go back and we look, we can see here that the web client is allowed to communicate with the product API. Actually, let me change this. Let's allow the web client is allowed to communicate with the listing API, and then the product and listing APIs are able to communicate with the data layer. So prepare to be amazed by the beauty of this website. What we can see here is this very simple UI that is basically just, it's calling these two separate APIs, products and listings, and just displaying the set of results that it receives. So I don't know if you noticed there, I was actually denying traffic and one of these was red. So what we can easily see here using Connect is if we just go in and say that the web client can no longer, let's disable the product API. So if we switch this from allow to deny and we save our intention, then we go back and we try to read the page again, all of a sudden there's an error communicating with products. So just that quickly, the local console agent, it actually does a fair amount of caching. So this puts the Connect agent in the line of in the network path. So we have to ensure that the performance is negligible. The performance impact is negligible. So there's a tremendous amount of caching that's done that ensures that things like the CA and the certificates and the intentions that are allowed are all stored locally. And then in order to quickly update that on change, Consul actually issues a blocking API to the Consul servers. So as soon as I change this intention, then all of the endpoints that are running the service, either web client or product, will, through the use of a blocking query, will update their local cache, and you can see that it's just that fast to disable things. So let's go in and just disable the listing API as well. And when we refresh here, then we see that it's blocked. So this is obviously a really simple example with just a couple of APIs. But as you think about moving into more of a microservices deployment, or just breaking out some of the services to different locations, just decomposing a monolith, then you'll quickly start to have the number of services balloon, sometimes out of control. And when you try to just when you try to take the CIDRs that represent those endpoints and start applying them to all of these different services that are essentially in the same plane, so east-west traffic versus north-south, it basically just breaks down almost immediately. So this gives you a new way to think about security. So I don't care where these are running. In fact, what's interesting, I'm running this in GCP. Every time I deploy this, it has different IP addresses, and I don't have to worry about that because Consul is doing the authentication of the service regardless of the network configuration. So it's a much more natural way to think about securing our applications. So let's go back in and allow our traffic. And if we go back, it updates very quickly. And this is, this is a little bit faster than putting in a ServiceNow ticket for a firewall rule update. So there's a couple of caveats. Do I have? So if you're curious about this, there's a lot of information on the Consul Docs. There's a guide, or rather, there's an intro section that can show you how to enable Connect if you've already got a Consul cluster stood up. There's an entire section of the docs that goes over how Connect works. So right now, I have a very simple setup that's using a sidecar proxy. There's ways, and as I mentioned, there's a negligible performance impact. However, there still is a performance impact. So if you have a streaming application that's extremely sensitive to latency, you can directly integrate. You can bypass that product by directly integrating that application with Consul Connect. If you are looking at deploying another set of proxies, or if you already have other proxies deployed, Connect is flexible and allows you to use other proxies as well. We're doing all this through TLS. What's neat is I'm actually handling, so if you don't configure anything special, then when you enable Connect, the Consul server will actually just create a CA for you and manage those certificates for you. However, that's stored on the Consul server. It's not encrypted, it's just in the RAF data store. So I actually hooked my Connect system up to Vault. So I'm offloading the responsibilities of the CA management and certificate management from Consul to Vault. So we can see here if we look, we can. Whoops. If I click in the right place, there we go. We can see all the certificates that it's managing. We can easily roll the root certificate if we need. We have a much better auditing story if that's important for your organization. And it's just a more secure way to implement this. And it's not just Vault. It can integrate with other CAs as well, as long as they comply with the SPIFFE standard. So that's kind of the lightning round of Consul Connect. There's a lot more information to show you how it works. And from there, I think that we should perhaps take questions.
Awesome, thank you, Ehron. So one question, I think, to kind of back up a little bit, someone's asking, what is Connect? Like, what is the specific Connect of Consul?
That is a good question. So Consul initially provided those two things, service discovery and the KV store, which lets you do distributed configuration. So Connect basically is the sort of feature that makes Consul into a full-fledged service mesh. So it lets you secure communications between services. And it does this in a very easy and transparent way, assuming you already have a Consul deployment. It uses mutual TLS. So the traffic, so there'll be a proxy running on each node. Let's just imagine we have two servers and they want to communicate with one another. Each server would have a proxy, and the application would communicate with that proxy. The application is not communicating sort of outside its own borders. It's just communicating with that Connect proxy. That Connect proxy actually encrypts the data and then verifies or authenticates and authorizes through the Consul servers the endpoint that is trying to communicate. And assuming that it's authenticated and authorized, the communication is allowed to be established. And then between those two machines, all of the communications are encrypted via TLS.
Okay, thank you.
It's a pedantic explanation, but that's how it works.
Okay, and then the next question, this was while you were doing the demo, so it's a little incomplete, but they were asking, so if anyone can change the intentions, what about authentication to the web UI?
Yeah, so that's a great question.
That's all they put.
Yeah, no, that's a very astute question. Yes, you have. So there's actually a section in the configuration that goes into the production deployment, and I don't recall where it is. Maybe it's in the guides. Connect in production. Yes. So under guides, there's a section that says Connect in production that actually shows you the steps that you have to take to ensure that the Connect security model is valid. So right now, I don't have ACLs in place that would prevent other users from creating rules. So I say you can't. You just log into the UI and say that you can. Obviously, you can do all this through the command line as well. So you can script out these rules and codify them. That's not really security. So what you do is you have to implement the ACL system that Consul provides. And you essentially, let's say I'm the web client service, I have to have the ability to write information about the web client service, but I should not have the ability to write information about any other service. So I can register myself, but I cannot register other services. And there's also a secondary rule within the ACL system for intentions. So you could let a service register itself, but not modify intentions. So the short answer is you have to implement ACLs. You have to make sure, that's the first thing. You have to make sure that you're using TLS everywhere. So the gossip communication needs to be encrypted. The RPC communication needs to be encrypted. It's not by default. And then you need to manage your CA, so you can use Connect's built-in CA, but it's obviously much more secure to offload that responsibility to something like Vault. You may want to set up your host firewalls. So there's only a handful of ports that the proxies will communicate on. If you're using the built-in proxy, it's something in the low 20,000s. There's 256 of them that you'd have to make sure are open, and then you can just block everything else. Because assuming you're only using Connect, then no communication should leave the host. other than through one of those proxies.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And okay, lots of questions are coming in. This is great, everyone. So next question, Ehron, someone's asking, does Consul have load balancing features integrated?
So it does not have sophisticated load balancing features built in. Let's say you have 5 services, and if you issue 5 service lookups, you're more or less going to get an individual service each time. You get sort of this implicit load balancing through hashing that it's not actual round robin, and if you need to do anything fancy like path-based routing or anything like that, that is not present in Consul. So it is important to say that this could. So I'll take a step back. The way I see most customers implementing east-west communications. So if you have a microservices-esque application and things are on the same layer, they're not on the data or the data layer. They're in what would traditionally be the middleware layer. Usually, you'll just have a load balancer in front of every service, which is difficult to manage. And in that instance, you're not using the load balancer for load balancing. You're essentially using it as a single entry point into one of the service instances. So in that instance, Consul can replace that type of load balancer usage. If you need really sophisticated load balancing that's doing health checks or not health checking, but path-based routing or something like that, then you still, there's still a lot of times when you would need an actual load balancer alongside Consul.
Okay, great. And then someone's asking, does Consul Connect work with Docker? Do we need sidekicks with Connect agent, or one per host, or how? Or per
Yeah. So it's honestly the feature itself is a few weeks old now officially. There's always a question of how to use Consul with Docker. If you're using it, there's different ways that you can do it. You could have a Consul agent in every container, every running container. You can have a sidecar per host. If you're doing something with Kubernetes, you'll generally have a sidecar running per pod. I don't know if there's an official right way to do it at the moment. There are a number of different techniques that I've seen people use successfully. And it also depends on what you're trying to do with Consul and Docker. I mean, if you're explicitly using Connect, then the sidecar method would work, and we'll actually have some more information on that coming soon.
Okay, great. And the next question, is there any significant change in overhead or speed when using Connect since everything's encrypted with TLS?
Yes, there is. The encryption part's not a tremendous amount of overhead. It's just the communication over the proxy. So we did some very informal testing, and we saw as much as 5 gigabit per second through the built-in proxy. However, it is very basic. It's not a particularly sophisticated proxy. If you have an application that has extremely high throughput and impacting the throughput in any way would be problematic, then at that point you'd want to look at either directly integrating Connect into the application. So essentially, the same API calls that the proxy calls to authorize and authenticate services, you can actually just call directly. So if I have some kind of a streaming application, I could just make the API calls from that streaming application myself. Or if you already have a very high performance proxy, then you can Connect offers you the ability to run a managed proxy. So instead of using the sidecar proxy that Connect ships with, you can tell Consul to execute and manage your existing proxy that is already sufficiently performant for your application, and just eschew the use of the built-in proxy altogether.
Great. Okay. And then next question. So Ehron, someone's saying they have Vault with a Consul backend. So Vault takes care of registering that service. Is it possible to have it stand up a Connect proxy as it registers?
I am afraid I don't quite understand that question. There's separate bits of functionality. So your communication from Vault to the Consul cluster should already be encrypted with TLS. So it actually doesn't need Connect. The way that you integrate Vault with Consul Connect is by letting Vault manage the certificates. So instead of having the CA on the console servers, there's Vault. For those of you who don't know, Vault's a security product that HashiCorp also manages. It has these secret engines that you can mount, so it's this really flexible tool that can operate in a variety of different areas. So one of the things Vault can do is manage your private key infrastructure. So what Connect does is it uses Vault. So you enable the Vault PKI, and then Connect will, or rather you give Consul a token that can communicate with Vault, and it will create the PKI backends that it needs. It'll store the CA in the root, and then it'll create an intermediate that's signed by the root, and then all of the certificate requests that come from the agents, from the endpoints, it will generate using that intermediate. So you don't actually need Connect between Vault and Consul, because that should already be encrypted using TLS.
Okay. Okay, next question. Someone's asking, what TCP port does Consul Connect use for the backend TLS connection between the Consul agents? Same port as the target service or a fixed port? They're looking at this from a firewall theory.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if we have any graphs. So this kind of question is always very difficult to answer without a whiteboard. Essentially, so there's a number of different ports. I know there's a section on here where we talk about ports, but I don't recall where it is. There's a number of different ports required, and I can't remember where it is in the docs. So Consul itself has a local agent that runs on each endpoint, and it listens on port 8500. So you interact with your, or 8600 rather, you interact with your local agent, and then the Consul agent actually translates that and makes an RPC call to the servers on your behalf. So if you already have Consul in place, then you don't have to open up any additional network ports other than just the default ports that Consul uses. And again, it's on the site. There's a handful. There's like 8300, 8301, 8302, 8500, something like that. And those ports are used for the authentication and authorization calls. Now, the proxy itself will actually bind to a port. So there's a range of ports that the proxy, the built-in proxy, will bind to. It's like 20,000 to 20,255 or something like that. So it's assumed that those ports would be open locally on the local host. So 20,000 through 20,255 is probably the answer to your question, as well as just the normal Consul RPC ports. And again, that's on the site. There's a section, is it maybe in the proxies section? Let's see. Yeah, it's on here somewhere.
Okay, awesome. So next question then, Aaron, someone's saying, so they assume the IP of the proxy is the one responded to by Consul. How is the port of the proxy discovered?
That is discovered using Consul. So that's actually a great question. And because I went through so fast, I didn't really explain that part. Here we were doing sort of standard service lookup. Let me just grab a. So let's look for, what am I on? Listing service, listing. So, we can get, so this is just a standard DNS lookup that's getting us a record. So this is the way we get the address. Consul also supports SRV records. So if we, if we also do a serve record, then we can actually find the port. And this is just an example, but this is the way that Consul would provide both the IP address and the port. The neat thing about this is when I register a proxy, so I talked about it being simple, but I didn't actually show you why. Let's look at the way that you actually register a service.
And can you zoom it in again, Aaron?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if we look at the way I registered my service, I don't know why that's highlighted. There we go. Okay, so the actually, this is not a Connect enabled service. Let me go to, let's look at the database, for instance. Actually, no, I keep picking the wrong one. Let's look at this because it has an upstream. So the way this works is this top portion of the service registration is standard console. We give it a name, we tell it what port it's running on. So this, by the way, with the standard console service would be how console knows what port it's running on is we tell it when we register the service. Then we register a handful of health checks. So in this case, I'm running a TCP check and just making sure the API responds to a health endpoint. And this is what's new. So this is the stuff that came out with Connect. In order to use Connect, I have this new stanza when I register a service. So Connect, and then it has a proxy stanza, and then we're giving it the config. Then we have this concept of an upstream. So an upstream tells the console agent what to connect to. In this case, my upstream is going to have a destination name of MongoDB, and my local bind port is 8001. So what that's telling console to do is you might have, I mean, you actually might have just assumed I did it before we started, but I didn't have to tell the agents where the services were in any way. Because we have this upstream portion, console itself is actually responsible for connecting to those agents, if finding out both the endpoint address and the port, just using this upstream destination name. So this is a registered service, therefore console knows where it's running. And then my local bind port tells my local application what to connect to. So if you have a traditional if you have a traditional use of console, you can use you can get both an A record or an SRV record to get the address and the port. If you're using Connect, then you actually don't have to do service lookups at all because you're just communicating with localhost, in this case, localhost port 8001. And then the proxy at that point is responsible for figuring out where on the network to send the traffic.
Okay. Perfect. And then the next question, Ehron. So someone's asking, in the example given, what address was the web UI using to talk to the listing API? And how did the web UI get the address of the listing API?
So that's a great question. And it's just using this connect section. That is the same thing. The web client has these two upstreams. It has the, well, actually, let me make sure that I'm telling the truth. Let's see. So my clients, yeah, so I think it's just calling localhost. Yep. Yeah, so there's okay. So I wanted to make sure I was not telling a story. In this case, the application is just calling localhost, and there's a proxy running on port 10,002 that maps to the listing service. And then there's a proxy running on 10,001 that maps to the product service.
Okay.
So again, I'm not having to do any service lookup myself. I'm just using Connect to letting Connect handle that for me.
Awesome. Okay. And then someone's asking, so they're also using they say, I run Vault in Docker. However, every time a pod/container restarts, it loses unsealed status. So Ehron, they're kind of wondering how this, they're saying, how would that auto magically work with having Connect certificates in Vault?
Well, I mean, it has to be unsealed. So there's a couple of different ways you can handle that. Within the enterprise version of Vault, there are some auto unseal options. So you can connect the Vault cluster to a KMS service on GCP, Azure, or Google, or an actual HSM. If you're running this in open source, then unfortunately there's not really a good solution. I mean, it does assume that Vault is unsealed and available.
Okay. And then someone's saying how, when you briefly showed that there's an incoming proxy for the web clients, would this replace the typical reverse proxy? If yes, can you explain some of the benefits?
So that's a good question. And I actually don't know if it would. So in fact, I don't think it would. So, one of the reasons a long time ago I was a developer and we use Nginx in front of our web services to do things like connection throttling and, serve up static resources and things like that. So in this case, Connect's probably going to connect to that same Nginx server or whatever it is that you're using in front of your service to perform those same types of functions. If it is a Connect-enabled proxy, so imagine, I actually could imagine, I don't know, 6 months from now, maybe Nginx will support Connect or something like that. And in that case, you might not have two proxies, you might just have one, and it would be Connect enabled. But right now, if you're already using a proxy for additional functionality, let's say, so I don't want to send all of my traffic to my Java web service because it's really slow at some things, then at that point, you're probably still going to have the proxy that's there already between Connect and your application. I think that's correct. I might be wrong on that, but that's sort of what my gut's telling me.
Okay. And then next question, and we'll just take a few more. There's been lots of great questions, but we're running out of time. So someone's saying, in terms of firewall rule management, can the originating app connect directly to services by bypassing the console agent and you firewall off apps requiring communication through console?
Yeah, so that, if you bypass console, then that essentially invalidates the security guarantees of Connect. The idea here is that a service would only be listening on localhost. Because if an app can directly, so let's just imagine that it's listening on all ports, or all addresses rather, and some things are connecting through Connect and some things aren't. The stuff that isn't, you have no control over, I guess, unless you, at least from the context of Connect. Yeah, the assumption is that your services are only listening on local hosts. They're not available over the network, and that all communication has to be originated via the Connect proxy.
Okay. And
or natively integrated, but all communication should come through Connect.
Mm-hmm. And then kind of a question, Aaron, someone also asked, is it possible to ask Consul Connect that communications could be locked to a specific zone between services in order to discard inner zone communications until a failover is needed?
I honestly don't understand that question. You can, I'll take a stab. You can do things with prepared queries, like limit the result set that connects to. So I just have this section that gives a service name. You could also use a prepared query. So if you had tags or something set up like that to separate zones, then that would be a way to deal with that type of problem. But in this case, I'm honestly not sure what zone is referring to.
Okay. And then someone's asking, will Consul itself use the proxy for health checks?
No. So in fact, let's just take a look at the services just to make that clear. So if we go back and take a look at the services, you'll see here, so for every service, I have a service proxy. So listing and then listing proxy, and MongoDB and MongoDB proxy. So these are actually two separate services. So listing is registered through Consul, and then because it's Connect enabled, Consul also registers this listing proxy service. But this service actually has its own set of health checks. So if we go in Consul proxy listing, in this case, I said it was between 20,000 and 20,255, we see this is listening on 20,105, and it's healthy. But then we also have my standard health checks that is the application, and then the application TCP. And then we have the the liveness check, the serve check. So it does not use the proxy, and in fact, the proxy is a separate service and has its own separate health checks.
Okay. And then we'll take two more questions. So someone's asking, do we plan to add any tracing or metrics for the proxy communications?
Yes, we absolutely do. Well, let me take a step back. We want to add audit information for things like security failures. If you mean like observability, then probably not to the built-in proxy. If you need more advanced functionality like distributed tracing and things like that, then there's in the future, Connect will integrate with other platforms that offer that kind of functionality. Yeah, the basic proxy is essentially meant, and in fact, the basic CA as well, we wanted to make it so that if you needed to test this, if you just wanted to try it out, that it was very, very easy, that essentially you just, flip some config options and then magically it works. If in production, there will more than likely be all kinds of caveats that make the built-in functionality, not the best option. And that's why Connect is built to be extensible.
Okay. And then, so next question, Aaron. Someone's saying, given you can control service-to-service traffic through Connect, what is the recommended network security configuration? Should all machines inside a virtual network be allowed to communicate with each other? Can all but certain ports be blocked?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the thing is there's not a right answer. I mean, security itself is a trade-off between how secure something is and how much you hate using it. So, you could have an environment that has everything blocked with the exception of 20,000 to 20,205 and only use Connect. And then obviously like the few management software ports you need as well. And, systems that are completely locked down, but that would probably be difficult to manage and, it could be difficult to live with. So I guess the question of do you need to do that really depends on what the security requirements of your organization are. If you're the NSA, you probably need to do that. If you're a retailer, it might not be necessary, or maybe it is. It just really depends on what it is that you're securing.
Okay. And then, so kind of on the security note, someone's asking what role does, and this will be our last question, what role does Consul play in a production grade deployment of Vault? Is it only for maintaining DR and HA? Anything else?
Yeah, so when it comes to Vault, the Consul's involvement, if we just ignore the fact that Connect exists, is in fact, it's where data is stored. So it's where Vault actually stores the secrets. And it also, so I mentioned that session thing sort of early in the webinar. That's how Vault determines which node is the leader, which node is active. So Consul serves as the data store, and it serves as, I don't know what you call it, but the session management, the availability component that lets your local Vault cluster be highly available and allows a Vault node to go offline and for you to not lose any kind of service.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Ehron. And then, so we're going to wrap up there with questions. And thank you, Ehron, for powering through all those questions. I'm sorry to everyone that we didn't quite get to yours, but hopefully we got through at least some of them for you. And I hope everyone enjoyed today's Hangout and has a better understanding of our new service mesh with Consul Connect. Thank you for joining, and a big thank you to Ehron for his time today. As I mentioned at the beginning, this Hangout was recorded, and we will make the recording available on our website after processing. I'll also send you all an email, everyone who registered, with the recording link from today. You can also keep your eyes out on Twitter, where I'll post the recording. And so that wraps things up for us today. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.